Carol Anderson, White Rage. We talk about, again, American history. Obama to Trump, racial backlash. Pathological racism. The psychological investment in whiteness. And she does some great history and teaching about the Cold War and the space race and how that's a great example of many of how racism hurts white people and how racism hurts all people. You know, that's one of the themes I repeatedly go back to. I mean, just a pleasure to chat with. So relaxed too. Sometimes you got kismet with folks. Just that energy, immediately you realize you're fellow travelers, and I just learned a lot. So next segment, New York Times bestselling author, one and only, Carol Anderson, here on The Chauncey DeVega Show.
So throw your coat down on the pile. There's no room on the rack. So throw your coat down on the pile. Yeah, we joke around all day long, but when night time comes, we joke around some more. Just throw your coat on the pile and get yourself out on the wall. Just throw your coat on the pile.
I've been reaching out to folks, and the first question I've been asking everybody, because I'm legitimately curious, because what you see very often is a function of where you sit or where you stand. How do you think this happened?
I think it was a combination of forces. I think part of what happened was that the Republican Party had been trawling in the ground of white supremacy for a long time. Particularly, I'm going to take us back to the nomination of Goldwater in '64. But particularly, you know, when he came out against the Civil Rights Act, then I think where it became most striking was the Southern strategy launched by Richard Nixon that sought to woo the disaffected, not just the Southern Democrats who were angry with Lyndon Johnson for basically saying that African Americans were U.S. citizens and therefore had the rights of U.S. citizens. It was so untenable to the Southern Democrats, and Southern Democrats like Strom Thurmond, for instance, that they began to woo the Southern Democrats, but they were also wooing the white ethnic vote in the North and the Midwest. And you saw that in terms of the kinds of language they were using about, you know, we are the silent majority and we have all of these people. We've got to have law and order.
And Nixon's hard hats, the construction riot, where he would send out his goons to beat people up in New York.
Got this kind of sense of an us versus them, and that them, you know, all those black people are taking away our jobs, our good schools. They're threatening our neighborhoods. We can't have good schools. We can't have security. We can't be safe. You know, all of those kinds of buzzwords. And I think that that was the beginning for where the Republican Party, as it welcomed, as it brought that toxin into the party. So that's part of what we see. I think the other part of what we see that led to the selection of 45, the growth of right-wing media that created this incredible cocoon-like bubble of disinformation. So I saw a stat that said 1/3 of all Americans get their news only from Fox. Well, if that's all you get, and that's been nurtured over the years, then you only know what's in that cocoon. And I think that that was part of it. And then I think another part of it, since that government was the enemy, that constant drone that government is the enemy, government is the enemy, government is the enemy. And then finally, the election of Barack Obama. Having a black man ascend to the White House, to do so, he did so by the greatest voter turnout in American history since it's been documented. And he did so also by bringing in 15 million new voters into democracy. 15 million, that included 2 million new African Americans, 2 million new Hispanic voters, 600,000 new Asian American voters. And that was absolutely jarring to a Republican base that had moved so far to the right that it's about something like 92% of the Republican Party is white. So they have skewed so far to the right that there's no thing like a real moderate Republican anymore. And then you get somebody who is decidedly racist, as Trump is, who launches his campaign, his political career, on birtherism by challenging Barack Obama's citizenship. And the imagery is powerful because you have this white man demanding to see the papers of a black man to prove that he deserves to be there. It's like the slave days. That resonated.
And I describe this moment as, I try to work with themes, repetition. So in a lot of my pieces, I'll use the same phrases. That this was a white privilege temper tantrum. And you think about a child, you think about this rage, and certainly we're going to talk about white victimology and white rage because they're so intertwined. Thinking about this idea of the federal government as bad, as evil. Well, as you certainly know, you've written about, that goes back to Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson, the idea of shiftless, lazy Negroes who are going to take advantage of the government, and it's animated and reanimated like a zombie. Reagan talking about strapping young bucks and stakes welfare queens. And then you have Trump marshaling this anti-statism, and then you have a hurricane where you need the federal government, you need the state, and they so hollowed out the legitimacy of the government. You got these folks who voted for Trump now begging for help. But help me with my soul, the transcendental sense of the soul. Because one of my dear friends has said I've become jaded, and I think we can't surrender to cynicism in these times. But I was not surprised by this. I tell people I predicted it on national TV repeatedly. People thought I was crazy. And I said any student of American history and anybody who looks at public opinion or even common sense, that beautiful black family and their competence and grace and all of his successes, whatever his failings may be, and I got a lot of criticisms for Obama, but a hell of a lot of successes, that do you honestly think there wouldn't be a white backlash? And you see the surprise on the night that Trump won. Well, I had a drink or two and I was just watching like, MSNBC, CNN. They were looking at it like it's the end of the world. They couldn't believe it. And I'm yelling at the TV. I'm like, what country do you live in?
No, and I think that part of it is that it seemed unfathomable, but it wasn't. Part of what I documented in White Rage, that the implementation of white rage, and white rage isn't what we often think about like with a cross burning, or like at Charlottesville, right? But white rage is the implementation of really cool, methodical policy to undermine black advancement. That when African Americans achieve, when they aspire, when they gain access to their citizenship rights, there is a wave of policy that then is crafted to undermine that, to push it back. Track this from Reconstruction to the Great Migration, to the Brown decision, to the Civil Rights Movement, and to Obama. And so Obama, who not only was black, but as you know, was actually competent. You think about it, there wasn't a scandal. Coming out of Reconstruction, they talked about the horrors of black rule, and they had all of this mythology there. Well, they still have mythology about Obama. You listen to the right-wing pundits, and they talk about it was failed presidency. There was so much, he did so much wrong. He destroyed America. Except you could only say that if you're in your own racist-encrusted bubble. Here we had the United States, when he took over, that was on the edge of economic collapse because the Bush administration, W's, had removed the regulation that kept Wall Street from acting like a USDA grade A prime B fool in the housing market.